Hello there! Welcome to Ye Olde Chapbooks,
A place where bookworms chat about books.
The book we read this month was Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer,
which tells the true story of Christopher McCandless and his solo journey across the United States. Into the Wild tells the story of Chris McCandless and his inner struggles with materialism, his family, and just society in general.
His story begins when he graduates from Emory University.
And after graduation, Chris really, I guess you'd say, starts to put his beliefs into action when he donates his life savings of $24,000 to an organization designed to fight hunger, and basically just packs up, leaves, and takes off on his own.
Riding along in my automobile.
So Chris and his beloved Datsun take off and eventually end up in Nevada.
And while sleeping in the desert one night, Chris gets caught in a flash flood, which destroys his car.
My baby beside me at the wheel.
At this point, Chris thinks it's a great idea to burn all of his money, his identification, and take off on foot, and basically becomes known as a leather tramp.
Now, a leather tramp is basically a fancy way of saying a hippie that walks around, or a fancy way of saying a hitchhiker.
So Chris is really into this new lifestyle, this way of life that he's created for himself, so he decides to renounce his family, renounce his old way of life, and give himself a new name.
And eventually Chris tramps his way into Oregon, where he meets Jan Burrs and her boyfriend Bob. And Jan and Bob are both rubber tramps,
which is basically a fancy term for hippies with a vehicle.
If you're going to San Francisco.
Chris spends enough time with Jan and Bob to develop a really good friendship, but eventually he decides it's time for him to head off on his own again.
So what Alex decides to do with his time is he buys a secondhand canoe and I guess makes it a goal that he wants to paddle this canoe down the Colorado River, through Mexico, and into the Pacific Ocean.
Problem is, he intentionally leaves himself unprepared. He doesn't buy a map, and he ends up getting lost, where he eventually rescued by a bunch of duck hunters by the Morelos Dam.
And at this point, this is just a reoccurring theme throughout the book. I feel like you said, he's not prepared for anything. He doesn't plan ahead. He doesn't have the proper supplies. Like, that's part of the challenge for him. He eventually, like Mark said, gets stranded in Mexico and ends up having to sneak across the border illegally because, along with his money, he burnt his identification.
After smuggling his ass back over the U.S. border, Chris realizes that it's great to be a free spirit, but that he also needs money in order to accomplish his ultimate goal of going to Alaska and exploring the wilds.
So in order to raise money, he gets a job at McDonald's.
You want fries with that?
And he works there for a month, saves some money, and then he meets up with his friends Jan and Bob again in a place called the Slabs. He basically camps out with them all winter and just prepares himself for this Alaskan odyssey.
North to Alaska, to go north to rest your soul.
So after leaving the Slabs, Alex continues to travel across the country where he meets many different people, but especially impacts two in particular. The first was a man who owned a grain elevator in South Dakota, and he and Alex actually hit it off so much that Alex would write him sporadically as he traveled around and would backtrack and work for Wayne whenever he needed money or just a safe place to stay.
And the second man that Alex really formed a relationship with was Ron Franz. Ron Franz was a man who tragically lost his wife and son in a car accident. And after many years of struggle with this, he met Alex. And he's so taken by Alex that he actually offers to adopt as his own son. But Alex is so focused on his Alaskan adventure that he selfishly ignores him, blows him off a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Much like he's done with his own family throughout this whole, odyssey that he's on. The whole 2 years he was gone, he never told family that he was leaving. He never contacted them. They had no idea where he was. He just left. So after almost 2 years on the road, Alex finally makes it to Alaska. He's last seen hiking by himself down the Stampede Trail.
Here I go again on my own.
Going down the only road I've ever known.
Eventually, he comes upon a bus in the middle of the wild, which he dubs the Magic Bus, and he makes it his home. Society, crazy breed, get lonely without me. Society, crazy breed, hope you're not lonely.
While in the wild, he shoots a moose.
And he survives 100 days all on his own in the middle of the Alaskan wild.
So July rolls around, and Alex decides he's had enough, he's proved his point, he's had his adventure, he's ready to go home.
So he heads back down the Stampede Trail. However, when he gets to the river that was small when he crossed it in the spring, he finds a roaring large river that's impossible to cross due to snowmelt and rainfall.
So he decided the best thing for him to do was just go back to the bus. The only problem was he was completely out of the few supplies that he brought with him. So the only thing he could think to do was start just foraging in the area around. He was eating berries, he was eating plants, and this is where the details get fuzzy. It's thought that he ate a plant that was poisonous that caused his system just to shut down and eventually made him starve to death. Yeah, but he died, spoiler alert. I guess my impression when I was reading this book was he just struck me as a guy that was very smart, first of all. He graduated at the top of his class, very smart, very resourceful, very charismatic,
Yeah.
Just based on the friends and the relationships he made in 2 years. And for a guy to be so passionate about just the injustice of society, what he did it kind of seems like a lady sellout thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't he, get a job that he could have helped people if he was so passionate about, hunger, so passionate about, people living in need. Instead of helping people, he chose to just take off and do his own thing, just retreat from society.
So what do you think, ye old chapbook audience?
Was Chris McCandless a visionary or a douchebag?
Let us know on our Facebook page. And until next time,
Keep on
reading on.